From an undersized boxing hero from Philly to his most violent role of all, these are the most toxic Sylvester Stallone characters ever. It's no secret Stallone's become one of the biggest Hollywood action superstars of all time, playing roles in several memorable films since the 1970s, not to mention his contributions as a writer, director, and producer. He didn't have a clear path to fame, and he never would have guessed that he'd become an undersized boxing hero from Philly and a pop culture icon to millions around the world. Did you know that Stallone spent some of his earliest years in foster care? True story. He struggled emotionally after his parents' divorce in 1957, which made it hard to focus on his schoolwork, and he was expelled from several schools before moving to Philadelphia to live with his mother and her new husband. He enrolled in a special high school for troubled youth, and after graduating, he was determined to pursue an acting career, so he went to college to study dramatic arts. His first stop was at the American College in Switzerland, and from there he went to the University of Miami, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts. As soon as his academic days were over, he moved to the Big Apple and started his acting career. That next phase of life was no easier, though. Sly worked an assortment of odd jobs to make ends meet, including cleaning out lions' cages at the Central Park Zoo and working as an usher at a movie theater. At one point, his situation became so dire that he even accepted a role in a soft-core porn flick, 1970's The Party at Kitty and Studs, a role that paid him $200 for 2 days of work. Sly later said that he was homeless at the time, sleeping in the New York City Port Authority bus terminal for 3 weeks until he saw a casting notice for the film. He said, "It was either do that movie or rob someone because I was at the end, the very end of my rope." By the time the film was released, he had a new nickname, the Italian Stallion, a nickname he'd later use for his most iconic role of all, as Rocky Balboa in 1976's Rocky, the movie that catapulted him to superstardom. And he didn't just play the role of the rough around the edges fighter, he wrote the screenplay, refused to sell it to anyone that wasn't willing to cast him in the lead role and pay him top dollar. Little did he know, it turned out to be the best move of his career. His story about a poverty-stricken, small-time club fighter who collected debts for loan sharks immediately won over the hearts and minds of fans and put his name on the map. The film was nominated for 10 Academy Awards and won 3, including Best Picture. Rocky Balboa wasn't the biggest, strongest, or most talented fighter, far from it. But it was his drive to keep getting up off the mat and his ability to never quit that won over audiences. A never-say-die attitude is definitely inspirational. But at some point, being a responsible adult should be your primary goal, especially when you have people that depend on you. So dying in the ring isn't a fate that anyone should aspire to. And sure, Rocky's an all-time classic movie. I mean, it was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States National Film Registry because of its cultural significance. But Stallone's early Balboa character is a great example of masculinity run amok, and today it'd be labeled as toxic by many fans and critics. He revised the role of Rocky 7 times since the release of the first movie, and the story stopped being about a warrior who's ready to die on his sword. After the release of 1982's Rocky III, Stallone took his fight-for-your-life action hero attitude and persona to another level, playing the role of John Rambo in First Blood. It's the story of a troubled and misunderstood Vietnam veteran, left to rely on his combat and survival skills after being unfairly targeted by a small-town sheriff. After breaking out of the local jail, John's forced to survive a massive manhunt by police and the National Guard. Sly's portrayal of Rambo as a one-man army is rooted in the reality of what many veterans face. Not the police manhunts, but the dismissal of their needs and harsh treatment toward them after they've been trained to kill and sent back home. Rambo was treated like an expendable former asset, and it was as if he didn't even exist anymore. Like Balboa, Rambo was a sympathetic character, but his actions saw him charged and convicted by a military court for several crimes. Rambo was only trying to survive and be left alone, and that was the basic theme that spanned 5 Rambo films. It seems obvious that a helicopter-stealing, machine-gun-wielding anti-hero would be toxic, and the same can be said for his character Lincoln Hawk in 1987's Over the Top. A long-haul truck driver, Lincoln wants to start his own trucking company and provide a stable life for his estranged son, So he heads to Vegas to compete in the World Arm Wrestling Championship. Of course he does. Because nothing says I want to be a responsible adult more than leaving my responsibilities behind to compete against guys named John Grizzly, Mad Dog Madison, Slammin' Carl Adams, and the undefeated champion Bull Hurley. It's hard to think of a more cartoonish portrayal of male machismo than Stallone's Lincoln Hawk. And ironically, Over the Top's a perfect title for the film. Today it might work, if it was a comedy starring Adam Sandler or Will Ferrell, but as a film with a serious tone, it'd be ripped to pieces by critics and audiences. Stallone's Hawk is a memorable man-child, but he wasn't a violent man per se, unlike so many of his later roles. 1989's Lockup told the story of mechanic Frank Leone, who's sentenced to time in a fancy new maximum security prison, where he gets into one violent bone-breaking encounter after the next. That's the story in a nutshell. When you boil it down, it does nothing more than showcase violent, male egocentric behavior, and modern audiences would certainly be walking out of theaters long before the end credits roll, just like they did for 1995's Judge Dredd, one of the worst and most violent roles of Stallone's entire career. One critic called the film one big, dumb, silly action cartoon, which makes sense considering its ultra-violent style. The film was recut and submitted to the MPAA 5 times to get it down from an NC-17 to an R rating, so that it'd be suitable for a theatrical release. Entire sequences were deleted from the theatrical release to reduce the violence, something director Danny Cannon was really upset about. Why? Because he wanted more violence. Even the film's ending scenes were deleted, after they were deemed to be too over-the-top to be shown to audiences. In the end, the film was a total flop at the US box office, grossing less than $35 million on a budget of $90 million. It served as a reminder that between the good guy roles of Rocky and Rambo, Sly played several violent egomaniacs that can be seen for the toxic masculine figures they are, like the role of Marion Cobretti in 1986's Cobra, where the tagline is, "Crime is a disease, meet the cure, and Cobra plans to cure it with an assault rifle." That's not a great message to send, but it wasn't looked at with the same shame it would be today, not even close. And before his role as the underdog boxer from Philly, he played his most violent character of all, Joe Machine Gun Viterbo, in 1976's Death Race 2000. In this movie, the more people you murder, the more you're rewarded. Stallone's Joe speeds around and commits brutal vehicular manslaughter with a smile, and he's loving every minute of it. In today's day and age, critics would tear a film like that to shreds, and I'm sure the anti-gratuitous violence crowd would be coming out of the woodwork to bash it. So, from his most violent role of all to an undersized boxing hero from Philly, those were the most toxic Sylvester Stallone characters ever.